Before we get started, just a quick note, spoiler alert.
And we are adults, and I will try very hard not to use adult language, but this is the warning.
Hello! Hello, and welcome to Last Library on the Left. My name is Jennifer.
And I'm Sadina. We're a horror review and discussion podcast where we talk about horror in books, movies, and other formats, why we seek it out, and why we need it in our lives.
And today we're discussing a chapter, which I have none of the info, so you're gonna have to read it.
Oh, that's true. Okay, so we are reading and discussing a chapter from a textbook titled The Rural Gothic and American Popular Culture, Backwoods, Horror, and Terror in the Wilderness by Bernice M. Murphy. I did not realize that was a woman.
Oh my gosh!
That actually reframes a complaint I had.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, it's by Bernice M. Murphy, published in 2013, so keep that in mind, please, that it's rather old. And it was published by Macmillan. So the chapters, and one of the reasons why this textbook was so interesting, was that they are titled, well, the introduction is, We're Not Out of the Woods Yet, which I hate.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into The Cabin in the Woods, Order versus Chaos in the New World, We Are But a Little Way in the Forest Yet, The Community in the Wilderness, Going Wendigo, Civilization and Savagery on the New Frontier, Backwoods Nightmares, The Rural Poor as Monstrous Other, which is the one we will be discussing today, and then Why Wouldn't the Wilderness Fight Us? American Eco-Horror and the Apocalypse. I like eco-horror. The back of the textbook reads, From the very beginnings of an independent literary culture, the North American wilderness has often served as the setting for narratives in which the boundaries between order and chaos, savagery and civilization... Oh, I just realized she's British. Sorry. Civilization spelled with an S. Savagery and civilization are torn down in the natural world, as well as the individuals and creatures associated with it become a threat to physical and moral safety. The Rural Gothic and American popular culture argues that complex and often negative initial responses early European settlers expressed towards the North American wilderness continue to influence American horror and Gothic narratives to this day. The book undertakes a detailed and historically grounded analysis of key literary and filmic texts. Okay. The works of canonical authors such as Mary Rowlandson, Charles Brockden Brown, and Nathaniel Hawthorne are discussed, as are the origins and characteristics of the backwoods horror film tradition and the post-1960 eco-horror narrative, which I'm also very interested in. And for anybody interested, it is actually part of a set that I saw that talk about the different tropes in American cinema, and this is just the one that was the most interesting to me for obvious reasons.
Right. Well, now my complaint is kind of heightened because she should know better.
Do we have the same complaint?
Mine is the Indian complaint.
Oh, no, mine was we'll get into
it.
But yeah, she should have known better, but that also kind of explains why her citations were probably so weird.
Yeah, I told Sadina in pre-production that I was really bothered because the chapter that we were reading, she mentions Indians referring to Native Americans or indigenous, but then she correctly says Native Americans, and so I was just like, why?
I bet the Indian part was whoever she was citing.
Yeah.
Because she has a lot of citations. Although her citations are odd because there's the footnote marker, but there's no footnote. You have to go to the back of the book for them.
Yeah. That's a pet peeve of mine, y'all. If you can't get indigenous right versus Indian. I'm an Indian. I'm not indigenous.
Yeah.
So that was my only complaint. I know for the most part in the UK, I feel like they refer to the natives by their correct name. So...
Girl, no.
No?
No.
The ones I know, they refer to them properly.
No, the European, no.
Just, I'm glad that the ones that I know refer to people properly.
The best you'll get is Amerindian.
Listen.
Speaking as someone with a history degree, yeah, Amerindian's the best you're gonna get sometimes.
And that is not the best that it should be. If you are aware, it is indigenous or native. Yes. It is not Amerindian. It's not Indian. It's not native Indian. It's native or indigenous.
Can we also talk about how terrible America is at that, though? Because when I was in Colorado, there was this whole stretch of streets named after native tribes, but not a single one of them was local. One of them was Algonquin, and I was like, no.
No, like, we're so ignorant about that. And we don't care to not get out of that ignorance. I don't understand why. It's a pet peeve of mine. And I just immediately think people are ignorant when they don't get it right. So I was, like, annoyed.
I bet it's the people she cited, because
but it
her
could be,
citations
yeah.
were pretty old.
Yeah, because the most recent movie she quotes is...
2007?
Yeah, Cabin in the Woods. And then she quotes the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Jessica Biel. So, yeah, early 2000s type stuff is...
Well, in looking at her bibliography, very, very few of the people cited have publications in the 2000s. A lot of them are in the someone she cited was from 1676.
Oh my gosh.
Cool. Anyway, so yeah, her citations are a little old. There's stuff for 1924 in this chapter, 1990s.
Yeah, a lot of the movies that she referenced were a lot older and movies that I had never watched.
Although she made a good point that part of that was because the Backwoods Horror was having a revival around the publication.
Yeah.
And a satirical revival too, which I like.
Me too.
I liked this chapter. There were things that because I'm a big history nerd, I have citations in my notes.
I'll let you lead this discussion.
Yeah. I have quotes and page numbers and stuff that backed my own opinion, which is, as a history writer, like, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You have a very strong opinion, and then you find things to back it up. So, cool. Which is like, wait, there's an arrow on this one part of my notes. Because I had started to write all this really kind of heated stuff. And I was like, all right, calm down, Sadina. That's really biased or like opinionated or whatever. And then I got to a quote that promoted it. And I was like, yes! So, I'm going to lead it. Okay.
You're going to lead it, yes.
First, I want to talk about what the author means by backwoods horror. Backwoods horror, according to her, shocking. I honestly thought it was a man the whole time.
Me too.
Okay. Anyway, so there are very specific things that backwoods horror in this particular instance had to have. There's type 1 and type 2 backwoods horror, and they are different in kind of a very like basic way.
Yeah.
Type 1 is more rare. Type 2 is more common. And type 2 is like the slasher stuff. Type 1 tends to be like the psychological.
Yeah.
We'll get into some other issues that are between type 1 and type 2 when we get to my biggest problem with her analysis. But backwoods horror also has specific instances of, well, every backwoods horror movie that she analyzed had instances of racism, inbreeding, incest, cannibalism, the unintelligent poor, and they primarily took place in 3 states: Virginia, Georgia, and Texas. Very few of them, like Hills Have Eyes and... what was the other one?
Was it Wrong Turn?
No, Wrong Turn used to take place in New England and they set it in the South.
Oh, right.
Oh, I forgot what it was. But the California ones were unique in that they were not fully considered to be part of backwoods horror because they had inhuman representations of human form.
Right.
So people that had either degraded to such a point due to environmental instances or inbreeding or whatever, that they no longer qualified as human.
And there were others that she mentioned that they just weren't geographically mentioned where they were located.
Right. They were assumed that they were located somewhere in the South, but there was no defining pinpoint area. Now, as I read this, and it was later confirmed in her analysis, but I began to wonder if the reason why the 3 states that are the most prominent ones are due to the colonialization and the eventual encompassing manifest destiny and Western expansionism.
It could be because she mentioned it a little bit.
She did.
Yeah.
So as I was reading, I thought about early colonial times before independence. What the South was considered was Virginia. And that would be considered mid-Atlantic now. And Virginia was also a much larger piece of land.
Yeah.
Georgia became the deep South.
Yep.
Once plantations and crop shares and things like that began. And then Texas was the South, but it was also the Wild West South.
Right.
It was the first instance of the Western frontier before Western expansionism and manifest destiny actually took the gold rush and went that way. So I think that's why the 3 main states are there.
I think so.
Another thing that she mentioned, which I didn't really fully agree with, but maybe that's because this is an older text, is that she said that Backwoods horror, the antagonists are mostly white males and rarely female antagonists.
I feel like she said that because of based on the movies that she referenced, right? Because we know otherwise. Because a lot of the movies that she referenced, that the males were obviously the main antagonists, and like the females were antagonists alongside the males. The males prompted them to be antagonists. They were a product of their environment. And so that was one that I didn't necessarily agree with, because I was like, I know plenty. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I didn't really care for it. One thing that I'll mention is when she talked about the Backwoods family, they're representatives of the other U.S. and not in a good way. But yeah, I didn't like that she said it was mostly male antagonists. I'm like, they're whole families.
Yeah, especially when you talk about the whole family as a unit being the ones who are the antagonist of the outsiders or the interlopers.
Yeah.
They often are led by the matriarch of that group.
Yeah.
And she did mention briefly that when a female antagonist is on screen, she's always the overweight matriarch. Whereas the men are either really thin and undernourished or completely obese. There's no in between. Which, yeah, I was like, thinking about it. I was like, huh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's accurate.
The next thing that she goes in to mention is this idea of the frontier.
Yeah.
And what that meant to the colonies, what they viewed those people as. And Thomas Jefferson believed that the pioneering into the wild woods were automatically more democratic. They were free.
Yeah.
Unlike the educated elite of the cities who couldn't bear the wilderness, they needed these people for expanding the empire. And so all these adventurous and heroic aspects of the frontiersmen, once, I guess, the land was settled, it was no longer heroic, and they all became perversions of those things. Yeah. Which is actually funny because, like, as I was reading that thing about Thomas Jefferson, here in my notes, I wrote, but does that breed a bloated sense of importance? Braggarts aren't patriots. Hyper-individualism isn't democracy. This false sense of superiority inflates the ego without context or room to grow. It breeds insular identities and causes social decay as cities progress without their input. Yeah. And then I came across this quote: a loss of the frontier caused the energies that were once positive and necessary for the growth and expansion of the nation had nowhere left to go, so they stagnated and decayed.
Well, and that also brings back to one of the things that she mentioned was that those in the backwoods are often resentful of those that have moved forward without them. So that just really just proves that whole point. Yeah. And just listen. This chapter was interesting because I'm not a history major. I'm not a history buff. I am least interested in history as far as anything goes. So when I was reading it, I was just like, huh, okay. Which is why you're leading the discussion today. I'll sprinkle in my opinions as we go through.
Another interesting thing that she starts to discuss about the early instances of backwoods horror is that with the colonial horror, where Virginia was the main place of backwoods horror, that anytime it actually took place in New England, in the older colonies, it was a supernatural backwoods horror.
That I found that scary.
Yeah, I was like, huh, supernatural, because like Virginia, Georgia, and Texas is all hillbilly redneck horror. Yeah. California is some type of environmentally caused human horror, but New England is always supernatural.
Always supernatural. I wonder how that relates to the, when you think about it now, like California is very environmentally friendly. They're always trying to keep things green. And I wonder how they were previous, or how the horror influenced the state as a whole, because whenever I think of New England, I think of scary stuff. I don't think of Chowder. I don't think of the Patriots. I don't think of anything else, but there's a lot of spooky shit that goes on.
Really?
Yes.
Because I gotta tell you, living up there, I did not experience half as much activity as I do here.
It's one of the stereotypical judgments that I have. That I always think of spooky stuff happens over there.
Now, I will admit, I wasn't particularly surprised by the supernatural horror because New England was founded by Puritans. There's a lot of like religious undertones into the way that shapes their thinking. And so I wasn't particularly surprised there because when they see supernatural horror, they mean witches and vampires and things that are anti-Christian. Yeah. But it was interesting to think about that because I don't know, when I think of the woods I don't want to go into, I think of New England.
That is so funny. I mean, I just don't know that I would go out at night in New England. I
can tell you, even so being funny. On the train between Worcester and Boston.
Right, because you would go on the train late at night.
I would be looking out to those woods and be like, there's someone dying out there right now and no one knows. during the day, it's really pretty and stuff. I mean, I still didn't go into it.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. But yeah, I would never go there because I
No.
just assume something supernatural will be happening. But that's the same like here. I would never go to the backwoods here. I've seen enough movies. I know not to do that.
But the backwoods horror here, I'm more afraid of like the snakes and the wild boars.
Yeah.
The wildlife. I am kind of afraid of the hillbilly and the redneck too.
Yeah.
But as Bernice Murphy says, the hillbilly is localized to Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
The redneck is localized to the deep and west south.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I have a lot of country family. And yeah, a lot of them are fairly terrible, but I'm more afraid of the animals that can get me out there.
I have a lot of country family too, which when I was reading this, I was like, wow, we're kind of country a little bit. Like, but I wonder if it's because we grew up here in Texas before, like, we grew up outside in the country before the city stuff started. And then when I grew up, it became more city-like, you know? It's sort of interesting because some of my cousins, I feel like they're kind of redneck, just a little bit.
Yeah, she did mention in some part of the chapter, because I have family in Louisiana who are like Cajun and they're redneck, but they're redneck and proud. Yeah. So it made me think like, okay, there's the people who inhabit that role as redneck, but are not of the backwoods horror trope.
Right, because she mentions Honey Boo Boo and like Duck Dynasty and stuff as the...
let's not say Duck Dynasty. Let's go with maybe, because she mentioned a few others. And
she mentioned a couple others,
Yeah, Duck Dynasty was definitely the most problematic of them.
Those are the only two that I remember, because I know Honey Boo Boo and I know Duck Dynasty.
Let's see, because she was talking about...
I think she's talking about them coming into the sort of the pride of it into now as far as reality TV goes.
Yeah. Okay. She says here, the past 3 years, so from 2013, so
2010.
Yeah, 2010 on, the past 3 years have seen a reemergence of this idea of the quote-unquote hillbilly or redneck as an amiable buffoon due to the success of a number of reality TV shows constructed around the concept. They include Bayou Billionaires, which I totally forgotten about.
I never watched it.
Buck Wild, which I think I assumed was like Girls Gone Wild. I did not, because I never had reality TV.
Yeah.
I just had heard about it. Moonshiners, did also not know that that was a TV show. I think I was getting that confused with some movie that Cher is in.
I mean, I don't know any of these reality shows. And I was a reality show.
That's true.
But like, I didn't watch any of the hillbilly stuff. I only watch Honey Boo Boo now because I want to see what happens with the mom because she's going through like her stint with drugs and stuff. And the girls are older. And so I watch it as the viewpoint of a mom trying to take care of Honey Boo Boo because I feel like she's too young to be dealing with a lot of the bullshit that she's dealing with. But that's the only reason I watch it now.
I will say this one sounds like the most fun to watch. Redneck Island. It sounds like either the most fun or that it actually turned into a horror movie.
Is it like a Jersey Shore type reality show? Or is it a dating show? Or is it like a Survivor? Like, what is it? What is it?
You don't know. And then there's Swamp People. And then, of course, there's Duck Dynasty. And here comes Honey Boo Boo.
Yeah.
Although that does remind me that I wanted to read. So she outlines the 11 identifiers of a backwoods family and how the opposite of one is bad. So the good backwoods family is identifiable by agreeable folks with their own homespun wisdom, family-oriented, members of a close-knit rural family, even beyond the nuclear one, representatives of the real U.S., God-fearing and moral, which was, I mean...
I rolled my eyes.
That one could also be part of the backwoods bad family, if you ask me. Poor but happy, close to nature, hardy and physically resilient, pragmatic and proudly individualistic, proud owners of their own ramshackle but beloved homestead filled with cherished homemade furniture, furnishings, heirlooms, etc., self-sufficient, they rear their own animals, pickle and preserve their own fruits and vegetables, and do their best to survive on what they can.
Which is sort of like Little House on the Prairie type family.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's actually really good.
Like, that's the only thing I thought of, like, Little House on the Prairie.
Or like Quinn Medicine Woman?
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that. Because, like, okay, for me, I'm gonna be honest, the true backwoods horror is a mix between the good and the bad of this list. Want to come sit on the couch and play with them? Come on.
Okay, go ahead.
I was doing races.
But you gotta be quiet, okay?
Yeah, I did.
My daughter is here today, so we may take a couple pauses.
Yeah. For her and Chainsaw to get reacquainted.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the only thing I thought of when I was reading. I was like, this sounds so Little House on the Prairie type. Because they're just so happy being, where they were.
Yeah. I actually was thinking a lot about Nadine's father side of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Her Meemaw Jean and Papa Harold were very country folk.
Yeah.
And a lot of her family is a lot of country folk. And a lot of these good qualities definitely are from them. So all of those quote unquote good qualities can be reversed and they become the bad Backwoods family.
Yeah.
So racist, ignorant, and uneducated, inbred, incestuous, insular, and xenophobic, representatives of the other U.S. and not in a good way, fanatical and intolerant, deeply resentful of those who have more economic power, feral, savage, and degenerate, physically and psychologically misshapen, brutal, callous, and psychotically idiosyncratic, deeply attached to a squalid, filthy, nightmarish hovel furnished with Ed Gein-style human remains, trophies from previous victims, and other visual signifiers of deviancy, such as the oddly settling sight of a chicken in a tiny cage in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And last, they treat fellow human beings like animals and preserve their remains in the form of smoked meats, barbecue, or stashed away in dirty old jars. The line between human and other animals does not exist for them. Everything and everyone is considered fit for consumption. They survive, but at the cost of their own humanity.
Yep. So one of the things she mentioned, I keep forgetting that this is
it's
a woman. She. I'm sorry. I read it and I was thinking a man this whole time.
Me too.
So one thing that she mentioned in the text, but not in that list, was that often the Backwoods family, they have taxidermy and bear traps out. And I kept thinking back to, I used to often go to cabins in the woods as a young kid, and anytime I saw a deer head up there, I immediately was afraid. And I wonder if it's because I thought that if they were so proud to put a dead animal on there that I wasn't safe.
Huh. Well, and she specified self-done taxidermy.
Yeah.
Instead of going to a professional, you just take pleasure doing it yourself, which is not great.
Yeah.
That really was upsetting.
Yeah. And in the movies, the bear traps would eventually be used as a weapon against you. Very, very scary. And I, as a person who's visited country houses and stuff, I often thought that they were out to get me. So, yeah.
So I think, personally, that the real Backwoods horror is a mix of those qualities that I just read. And it doesn't have to be true for the movies, but for me, the God-fearing is actually a bad quality.
Same.
I think that is one of the reasons that the God-fearing eventually kind of pervert their own standards.
Yeah.
Especially in isolation.
Yeah.
And so the isolation and the perversion of morals without outside, I guess, conflict.
Yeah.
To make them question or grow their own standards creates this perversion of their good qualities.
Because they only see what they believe.
Right.
And there's no one out there to test their beliefs or help them grow those beliefs into something more. So if Christian God-fearing person encounters me, they obviously think, I've been told many times that I'm going to hell because, I'm not what they perceive. Right. So I can only see this being...
And is that here in Houston?
Yeah, yes. That's here in Houston.
That's in the civilized location, people. So the civilized South.
So in the Backwoods, I could assume it's 10 times worse. So,
I thought a lot while reading this chapter of a documentary I recently watched on somewhere called The Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia. And for a while, I was like, okay. But white is their last name?
Oh!
They just also happen to be white? And I was like... Okay, I still think it's a little weird. Why would you title it that?
That was wow, why did you watch that?
I know, it sounds so... Girl, it took me a long time to watch it, and the reason why I watched it was because Christine from And That's Why We Drink watched it and talked about it.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, so it's not a KKK, thing. It's just these, hillbilly people. And I think that this documentary really does show the social decay and family decay really well.
Yeah.
Of how a Backwoods family that thrived at one point on the frontier has been left behind by the modern world and is now suffering from modern ailments like opioid addiction as the modern world encroaches upon them. And it's it was kind of sad because you saw that they still struggled to retain these family connections and these networks. And I don't know, I thought a lot about this family. Apparently, their family had come into some money because one of their uncles or someone, a man in the family, he became really popular on a late night show for his form of dance that they did in the Appalachia and his footwork and the music they did, and he got really kind of famous from it.
Wow.
And then he didn't handle it well because it was too much too soon.
Wow. I mean, not to make a joke, but he obviously didn't watch the Beverly Hillbillies, so he didn't know how to adjust. And I wonder if the Beverly Hillbillies was a play
based on the whole, that was the other thing too, is that once he died, he had passed on the family's dance traditions and music and stuff to another man in the family who was well renowned in this small community, but he also struggled with alcohol and drugs. He isolated himself, and it was really hard on the family to watch this thing that they were proud of suffer and decay, and it really humanized this version of the backwoods that she's discussing in a way that you don't normally get to see.
No, because I really haven't been exposed to that type of family at all.
Yeah. But I highly recommend watching it. If you can get over the weird way they phrased the title.
Yeah.
Like, the way they phrased that title, it was like, you had to have done that on purpose. You had to have known what you were doing.
I'm kind of offended on behalf of that title.
But it was good. And now, granted, I think that they do have some instances of those bad things, because I think that the family were a little racist, and they were isolated, insular, all those negative trope things, but they did have a mix of the other good things. Yeah. And I think that that's closer to what we see in reality.
It is, yeah.
And the backwoods horror just kind of, it only highlights one.
Yeah. And one that you don't necessarily see often. Right. Because I think I've only encountered a small, I don't want to say I've encountered that type of horror because I haven't, but I've gotten close to where I think I could have encountered it. Because I've watched horror. I turned around and went back away, you know? Yeah. So it's nice to see that sort of highlight on a different type of family.
Oh, another historical aspect of the hillbilly redneck mountain men of backwoods horror is that historically they're composed of the fiercely independent Scottish and Irish. In the textbook, she had put settlers, and I changed it to occupiers. But the Scottish and Irish, especially during that time of English occupation, were fiercely proud people. Right. And so they made up the majority of the backwoods frontiersmen, which explains why they were so individualistic and da-da-da and all these other things, was because they were already coming from that Great Britain. I learned a new word.
Which word?
I learned urbanoia.
Oh, yeah! I forgot to look that up last night when I was, because there's some words that I needed to look up, and I forgot to look that one up.
Urbanoia. Urban paranoia, which I'd never heard of before.
I've never heard of before.
And I wonder if Murphy coined it on her own, because it's the us versus them mentality, but specifically the city rich versus the country poor. So another thing that I quoted was, the South and the media in America's hive mind became a very particular kind of otherness. It allows a national audience to localize certain anxieties, mostly to do with race, without feeling threatened themselves. Yeah. And I have a theory as to why they do that, and it's because this is the very definition of the difference between racism in the South versus the North. The North ignores its racist infrastructure and denies it, while stigmatizing the open expression of Southern racism. This is how they excuse instances like Flint, the Northern treatment of BLM, and the racist shootings outside the South. There's this very strange disconnect between the North and what it sees as the other in the South. Whereas the North is just as racist.
Yeah, they sure are.
I have had some nasty things said to me for being Jewish from people in the North. And that is that God-fearing part, too.
Exactly.
I just want to point that out.
Listen, just because the North won, and that doesn't excuse you from being racist now. It's an ongoing learning experience for each human being. You need to make the steps like I do to consistently evolve and change as a human being. So...
Sorry, that was Aurora. Were you yawning or were you trying to get Chainsaw's attention?
Yawning.
Okay. I thought maybe you were trying to get his attention as he walked by.
She was yawning because I'm boring.
No.
This is recording with kids. So, as I was saying, like, just because the North won, sorry, you gotta keep it consistent and keep trying to evolve.
Yes.
Because there are so many things that are... The fact that the issue in Flint is still not resolved is insane to me. Yeah. And that just speaks of racist overtones, undertones, whatever you want to call it. Because if it was a white community, they would have fixed it.
Yeah, especially considering they're like, oh no, it doesn't exist here and everything. Just because the infrastructure is built in, and that's how privilege works, doesn't mean that it's not just as detrimental and politically driven as the Southern Jim Crow laws. Yeah. It's the same thing.
It is definitely the same thing.
They're just not called Jim Crow laws in the North.
Exactly.
That's the only difference. Y'all ain't special.
No, you're not. Sorry.
Now we're going to get into the role that the United States eugenics played in developing this more, I guess, the gap. Bless you. The gap that was created between the poor and the city. So between 1880 and 1920, the U.S. Eugenics Records Office, yes, eugenics, like the things the Nazis did before it was not cool to do, I guess.
I like that, not cool.
Yeah, because like, man, they put a lot, that's 40 years to be doing this. Anyway, so the Nazis like made it not cool. Okay. So the U.S. Eugenics Records Office tried to tie white trash degenerates to an original source of mixed blood.
Oh.
Did you read that far?
I totally skimmed over it. You know what? I think when I saw Nazi, I was just like, I don't know if I'm ready to read this. I must have skimmed right over it.
That's fair. It was a very brief part of a paragraph, but basically the ERO, the Eugenics Records Office, was going to what they considered to be white trash degenerates, but already in prison, that they would then take that individual and backtrack their family tree, trying to pinpoint when the white people mixed blood with people of color to explain the degenerate behavior.
Oh my god. I'm glad I didn't read that part.
Girl, it was messed up.
I would have already been more angry than I was reading the Indian part. I would have been really bad.
Not great. And they specifically tied it to two families. This like English guy and this French guy who they traced back these two families specifically. And she didn't really go into why they focused on these two families. But these were the two that they really found issue with for whatever reason. And the Eugenics Records Office was doing this research in order to control the poor instead of taking the funding from the ERO to provide better educational resources for them, which is like so typical because rich conservatives promote eugenics and sterilization like the Nazis did and think it's better than state-sponsored welfare. But let's all remember, state-sponsored welfare includes access to public services. Like education, like healthcare. And so the rich conservatives don't want to provide those services. Right. And they'd rather use debunked science from Nazis to declare them genetically deficient.
That is so gross.
So you want to know how they succeeded?
How?
So, after the ERO did this whole thing and like this family, Virginia alone, the state, sterilized 50,000 people deemed too violent or dumb to breed.
Oh my gosh. 50,000
people. And girl, those people are spread out. They are loosely settled to begin with.
So I must have missed that page because I saved all the pages in my photos, so maybe I just saved the wrong page. Maybe I didn't save that page.
Maybe you skipped a page.
Because that would have really set me off.
Because this was all one page.
I must not have saved that page when I was reading it. Thank God. That's horrible. 50,000 people in Virginia. Imagine if they would have gone through the whole United States.
Yeah. And it was backed by the Supreme Court.
Wow. Yeah. That's some disgusting nonsense, right? I think at one of the pages she says something about tomfoolery. That's legit tomfoolery right there.
Yes. And it makes you think a lot of the American perception of the backwoods is that they brought it on themselves. Yeah. When clearly it's the American public and government allowed it to happen.
There was one thing that I was reading where they were talking about the resiliency of the backwoods people when it comes to saving things that we're using and recycling things. And I was like, that's like a good thing. Yeah. Like, why is that a bad thing? But it made us to be like, that's why they're so bad is because they're so resilient. I'm like, yeah. But are they? Because I do that.
Yeah, one of the studies that she quoted was basically saying that because they don't buy mass-produced, easily accessible merchandise or material, they use what they can get their hands on and reuse it and mend it, that they're less than.
Yeah!
And I was like, man, I hit my own stuff all the time.
I know! That's so rude, because I do that too! It's just, I don't know. I was really ashamed.
I want to talk about one big thing, but I want to save it for just a moment and talk about just a few more stuff. So the cannibalism section where she talked about barbecue.
Oh my gosh, when she said barbacoa, I was like, oh no, don't do that to me.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that apparently barbacoa, barbecue, and barbecue were all generated through the English version of barbarous.
Yeah. Because
colonial man thought that the way that native food was prepared was primitive and base.
Yes. I think at one point they said savage. I was like, that is so rude because it's so good.
Although what makes me laugh is now it's one of the biggest American male pastimes.
I know.
And I was like, and it is the signifier of a wholesome family picnic in a community.
Yes, it is.
Anytime you see it in media.
What do we do on July 4th? Barbecues.
Right.
Father's Day, you're barbecuing. Like, during the summer, all you can smell is barbecue. During football season, barbecue. Like,
tailgating.
Yes! I was supremely offended when I was like, you're gonna go after barbacoa like that? A barbecue?
I wasn't offended. I was shocked. I was shocked that, I guess I shouldn't have been shocked though, now that I think about it, but I was shocked initially by the use of language to further degrade the rural poor.
It's a smart thing to do, barbecue. Why?
And in the early description of this paragraph, she was talking about how the early settler of Roanoke had made a watercolor of the local Algonquin tribe, you know, barbecuing and like having a spit pit. Yeah. And then some like British dude who was not connected to it at all made the barbecue into human features and like really kind of cartoonized the native people. And that was the image that stuck. Yeah. It wasn't the original primary source. I was like, oh, white people. Y'all be so messy. So messy. God.
Oh, man. Oh, goodness.
Another thing I wanted to talk about was towards the end of the chapter, she talks about how backwoods horror, by stereotyping the monstrous poor, it helps solidify the common ideology and images of a true nationhood, just like it did in the reverse during colonialization.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
How like they basically revered the frontiersmen for like giving them the expansionism of the empire, and now because it's not okay, they've completely turned it around. And I was like, man, that's messed up. That's Aurora.
I was like, baby, can you stop that, please? We're almost done, okay? Love you. Yeah. I lost my train of thought. I have to get on my daughter. Y'all, listen. Being a single parent means sometimes you can't do things 100%, and today is that day for me. I liked how I didn't like it, but I like how they use it against them. Right. That's just trash.
Right. That is so... If there's any true nationhood, that's it. Is to spin it politically to work in the favor of the majority. Yeah. That's what they did.
Yeah. So one of the things going into reading about the Backwoods, I was like, yeah, I'm nowhere near someone like the Backwoods. And then towards the end, I was like, these poor people, what are they doing? The resiliency and like saving stuff. I was like, I do that. Talking about the lack of diversity. And I was like, well, I mean, I can't blame them for their lack of diversity because they're so in their own little place. And to be honest, I'm sort of an introvert, so I'm in my own little bubble. So I get that a little bit.
If you don't have the money to live in a rich place, that also means you don't have the money to go to the resources that you need, so you make do with what you have, so you become insular. And
they don't have anyone going out there to give them resources, you know? So the more and more I read, I was like, God, I just relate so much to the Backwoods. I don't know. I felt really bad because the way that they were showcased is always negative.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily have the resources or the means to get out of that situation.
Right.
And that was my overall take of the chapter, which I really liked it. I do have a couple things. One of the things that she talked about was that for normal people, quote unquote, escaping to the wilderness is not the norm for them. Because when they go out, right, it's just like sort of a thing that they do. But the thing that she doesn't mention, which she doesn't know, which I don't fault her because she doesn't live in the South, but going to the river and going to the cabin is a thing. Yeah. That's what you do. Like, I have tons of friends that are down at the river this weekend.
Yeah.
So I wanted to point that out because y'all know we're in Texas. Y'all know that that's a thing.
It doesn't take long to get to either.
Right.
I think that's the other difference.
Yeah. And the way she mentioned it was that in these tropes, they're going to the river, they're going to the lake as a means of escape, where really it's just, that's what you do on your vacation down here in the South. You go to the river.
Yeah. And it's still considered a staycation.
Yeah.
It's barely even a day trip.
Exactly. So I was kind of like, that doesn't really, are you okay? Yeah. Did I see his tail?
Probably. He was up there on the counter.
Yeah, he was up there on the counter. And another thing that I really liked was she mentioned the trope of having to stop and then getting trapped even though your intent was never to stop. And that freaks me out, which is why I don't take a lot of trips throughout Texas because it's so long to get out of Texas.
Yes, that's a good point. It's so long to get out of Texas, and in the wrong parts of Texas, you don't know when the next stop is.
You don't. And it's very scary. Yeah. It is so scary. Like, I would almost go to Louisiana just to kind of circumvent getting out of Texas.
Oh, wow.
It's scary to me.
I mean, I get that. When we used to go visit Nadine in rehab, there were places, I mean, we eventually got used to this route, but there were places that the stretch was so long.
Yeah.
That you had to go really far off the main highway to get gas.
Yeah, because we would drive straight up to get to Canada when we were younger because we didn't have money for plane tickets. And I just remember how long it took to get out of Texas and how bleak it seemed when you're driving up through Texas because you're driving through all that farmland and stuff. And then coming back, I would be so anxious because I know we had to eventually drive back to Texas to get home. And it just is really scary to me. And even now, it still freaks me out.
Yeah. Fun fact for people who don't know, from the northern part of Texas to the southern part of Texas, it's a 13-hour drive. From the eastern part of Texas to the western part of Texas, it is a 13-hour drive.
It's too long. It's too long.
There was this one time I was on a road trip. I forget where I was going. And I got so far out into the middle of nowhere, I had to stop in a wind farm just to figure out where I was. I remember parking at the base of these big windmills and thinking, I have no clue where I am. This is not a part of Texas I know.
How scary is that?
Yeah.
That's so scary. It's so freaky.
Where there's one stop sign for miles.
No.
Yeah, it was terrible.
This is a no for me. It's a hard no. And that brings me to, I don't want to say it's a funny story because it was scary at the time, but I look back on it and I laugh. But so I had these two guy friends that we didn't travel, but okay, how do I say this without seeming like a weirdo? When I graduated high school, me and my group of friends, we would remake B-movie horror movies. So we remade the Blair Witch Project and called it the Greenspoint Project because we lived in Greenspoint. So we did a lot of commercials and stuff. And so around the time we filmed everything that we did, we developed this fascination with 7-Eleven.
Oh, yeah.
And we couldn't find it anywhere. And this is before the internet became like a real big staple, before Google and everything, right? So we found out that we thought there was a 7-Eleven around town. And so we're like, let's try. So we drove and we had to get gas. And we stopped off at this gas station in this place called Cove, which is right outside of Beaumont. And we pulled in, and I kid you not, 5 or 6 white folks came out looking at us. And so I'm going to reference it. I am Indian, so I'm brown skin. One of my friends was black, and the other one was Hispanic. There was not a white person amongst us. So when we pulled in to put gas, they were just kind of looking at us, and we were like, let's go somewhere else, right? So we turned around, we went somewhere else. We laugh at it now when we talk about it, but like it was so scary at that time. And it was right after 9/11 too, so it was like,
oh, the heightened.
So which also they make fun of me because when we actually found a 7-Eleven in Austin and we went to visit the state capitol, when I went in there was only 1 security guard. When I came out there were 2 security guards. So they always laugh at me and say that. Man. It was the same 2 guys. But we laugh now because, you know, we escaped it.
Right, like it's so far removed now.
Yeah, at the time I was just like, oh my gosh. I remember I had the camera and I was like, let me just put the camera down real quick because there might be some danger. It was insane. And I will never forget Cove because that was the little town.
Yeah.
And I was just like, never again.
You know, I've only ever had that gas station experience sort of once.
Yeah.
When Nadine was helping me move back down from Boston, I was driving at night because Nadine has stigmatism, so she can't drive at night. And I pulled off kind of far off the main road to get to gas. And it was such an old, janky gas station that I had to go inside and pay because like none of the pumps were new or it legit looked like it was from an old Rockwell painting. And I go in and Nadine stayed in the car to stay with my stuff. And I wasn't feeling great about separating. And then I had to use the restroom. Oh! And there was only the guy attendant, this like young kid, this like high schooler, clearly doing a job that he didn't want to do in the middle of the night. And this old guy kind of just in the back of, you know, like how some old gas stations, they have like the food too. Yeah. Well, the food thing was clearly closed down because it was late. Yeah. But he was still hanging out back there. And it was back by the restroom. Oof. And the door didn't lock. Oh, girl, I was so uncomfortable. I was like, if I scream loud enough, will Nadine hear me? Yeah. How long am I gone before Nadine realizes that she should come in and check on me?
Now we laugh, but like in the moment, like you're just so scared. Yeah. And you're so hyper aware.
So I get back to the U-Haul and Nadine, she must have been napping or eating or something. And I get in and I was like, all right, ready to go? She says, I have to pee. And I was like, okay, let me just warn you.
Here's a cup, Nadine. Do the best you can.
That was very creepy. I didn't like it.
So creepy. And the reason I mention is because they talk about the backwoods tropes and the hillbilly tropes as you pull into the gas and you get warmed by the old hillbilly guy. So that was...
Well, Murphy specifically talks about Cabin in the Woods and the satirical gas station incident, as well as Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Which, okay, I have it. I've never watched it.
I need to see this movie.
I have the DVD. Someone bought it for me and I was like, why have I not watched it? So now I'm gonna watch it.
Yes. I don't know why I've never watched it. I love Alan Tudyk. I love Labine. He's freaking hilarious. Yeah. She kind of described it a little bit in the book, and I didn't realize it was that satirical.
Me either.
I was like, oh my god, I have to watch this.
Yeah. Hey, Rora.
He may just want to sunbathe.
Yeah, leave him alone. Just sit and relax with him, okay? Boop his nose. Go boop. Yeah. Okay, he's like, get her out of here.
There was a big thing I wanted to talk about. And this in particular is even more shocking now that I know a woman was writing this textbook. But she talked about a anthrogeographic research paper by Ellen Churchill Semple. So this lady, Ellen Churchill Semple, wrote a anthrogeographic paper in 1910. So sort of in the height of all of this eugenic type research. And the name of her paper was The Anglo-Saxons of the Kentucky Mountains, a Study in Anthropogeography. And it was published in the Bulletin of the American Geographical Society, volume 62, I guess. Y'all have not read my Roman numerals in a long time. So the thing about her research, and at first I was excited because in the early 1900s, women very rarely were published. But she applauded the racial purity of the Kentucky mountain men she studied, even though she reported their intellectual and physical inferiority due to inbreeding and a lack of exposure to the outside world. She also complained that due to these weaknesses, they were far removed from the adventurous and heroic ideals of their pioneering forefathers. Yet she still was like, they are the epitome of white Anglo-Saxon purity. And I was like, none of that makes sense to me. How are you going to be out here being like, these men, while they are dumb and inbred and physically inferior, are the perfect, pure example?
Yes!
I was like, that does it. Guys, eugenics has been debunked. Yeah. It is a fake science for racist and rich conservatives to use to control the poor. Yeah. And this study and the conclusions she made, I think, speak for it. Yeah. How else would you explain the contradictory statements?
Yeah, that's insane.
Yes. So the thing that Bernice Murphy said, because I don't think this was part of her citations, I think it was something she actually said in the analysis that kind of upset me now even more, knowing that the author was a woman. She said, the lack of sexual assault or rape is seen as the more horrifying trope. According to the male gaze, I said that. Because a lack of sexual interest and the superior physicality of the woman, the protagonist, is considered monstrous and not normal. It's incomprehensible that they wouldn't want to rape her.
Yeah.
And that makes it scarier. When I first read it, I was like, okay, man. Like, someone who doesn't understand that the physical assault is far more terrifying.
Yeah.
And has much longer repercussions.
Yeah.
And then I found out today, an hour ago, that it was a woman who wrote this book, and I was like, no, I'm not okay.
Right. So, yes, I got it when it was a man because they always downplay that sort of stuff, right? But, like, a woman should understand that, and I kept thinking, like, I would rather a man think of me like a dog and just want me for parts, like, you know, like, to be a cannibal, right? I would prefer that. I don't want that, but I would prefer that over sexualizing me and wanting to physically harm me in that essence. Like, that is just no.
Right.
Just kill me and be done with it.
Right. I couldn't believe that. Well, when I thought it was a male gaze writer, I was like, okay, well, you clearly don't understand. And now that I know that it was a woman, I'm so upset over the assumption that a lack of sexual assault is more horrifying. No.
It's not at all.
How could slasher torture and stuff like that? Yeah, that sucks. But
it does.
Yeah, I'd much rather suffer that.
Same. The whole, like, sexual point of it and rape and stuff, like, that brings another level of terror and horror to me that I don't even want to deal with. I won't even watch that movie because it has a rape scene. I just won't. To me, she's got it completely mixed up.
Yeah. And I wonder if she was talking, because I don't think that this part is cited, so I wonder if she was talking for herself or under the assumption of the predominantly male gaze media that she's analyzing.
Right. I could see that she's talking under the guise of the male receiver too, or appealing to the male audience as far as the text goes. I don't know. I don't care.
Yeah, I still think it was very
dumb.
Yeah, it was very dumb and very short-sighted as a female to make those comments.
Yeah.
And I'm not super excited by that.
No. So when we started recording in this shock when you said the name, I was like, okay. Because I expect more from females than I do men. I'm gonna just go ahead and just put that out there. I expect more from women because women do more. Yeah. I'm sorry, we just do. We're capable of more, we do more. So I had higher expectations for her. Like a man, like, well, he's ignorant.
Like, what would he know?
Right. But she should know to do her due diligence. There has to be a study that debunks that little statement that she said. I'm sure of it. So yeah, that was really annoying to me. Just gross.
Yeah. It was probably my least favorite part about it.
Yeah.
I think the rest of it was pretty good.
I think so. I'm not going to take that away from her, that part. One of the things that I really liked, that she mentioned the lack of diversity in backwoods horror. And that brought to me how when Black people are featured in horrors, usually they're one of the first ones killed, or anyone of color is usually the first one killed. And I wish that she would have touched more on that a little bit, because I wonder how the correlation of that in horror relates to slavery and racism and how it's evolved, how the conversation of racism has evolved over the years. I would love to have seen her talk about that a little bit more.
Now, she did bring up an interesting part of Blackness in horror that I hadn't considered, where because the horror trope of backwoods horror is predominantly white males being the antagonists, that when the sole survivor comes across at the end, the black truck driver or the black sheriff, that blackness is a sign of safety. I'd never thought of that, and I was like, that's interesting, but it feels like an apologist way of avoiding the talk of racism. Because she did mention that the complete lack of people of color in horror is as if they are actively avoiding that concept, like you said, that discussion on racism.
Yeah, and I would have loved to have seen that explored just a little bit more, because I was really interested in that part of it.
Yeah.
I also found it interesting when she talked about the protagonist that would normally be like the final girl who are white.
Yeah!
That was so interesting because yes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Because now it makes me want to go back with some of those movies that I have seen that she mentioned in the text. I remember at the end of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 70s version, I think she was wearing white. And I think Jessica Biel was wearing white too in the remake, or at least a light color, right?
Yeah.
So that's
something that you can see the splatter and the grime on.
Yeah, so interesting. Because I never thought about that.
Me neither. And she said that they're like usually the only ones wearing white.
They're usually the only ones, yeah. Which is so weird and just, she has a keen eye for something.
Yeah. And she talked about, I didn't notice this, I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but she mentioned that the old Franklin farm, it wasn't until they went onto the back property behind it that wasn't part of the farm as part of the Hewitt family, that was when the murder started.
Ooh.
When they were in the initial house, they were safe. But when they went into that back barn and everything, that was
where
Hewitt.
They made the choice and they crossed over into...
Yeah, and they trespassed.
Yeah.
And then she was like, a big part of that is because in Texas, the cattle ranchers law, that talks about you can shoot anybody on your property. She said, when you think about it, the most horrific part of this movie is that none of that murder was illegal.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh? Oh no.
Really
it never occurred to me. And then like in my head, I imagined Leatherface on trial and I was like, in Texas, he'd be completely...
He'd be acquitted.
Yes. I was like, I hate that.
Yeah.
I wish she hadn't brought that up.
Yes, that was really, really good. That was really astute of her. And when she mentioned the choices of the gas station, they warn you, but you still make the choice. And then when they trespass, maybe that's why I liked Cabin in the Woods so much, because it brings all that to light. Because they had to make the choices, right?
Yep.
And so I just kept thinking about that. I was like, man, she's really like onto something there. Yeah. Oh my god, Chainsaw is so cute right now.
I know. Isn't he so cute?
He's like hugging the arm of the couch, and it's just really adorable, trying to get away from my daughter.
He's not. He likes just hanging out there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it.
Hey, baby.
You want him to go on your lap.
He's a very relaxed baby.
Oh.
Oh, sweet boy. Is there anything else we want to talk about from this particular chapter?
Nothing for me. I enjoyed it. I did have my reservations about a couple different things, but I think overall it was really good. She did give some really good movie recommendations. There are some that I put on my list of things to watch one day whenever I get a chance. Life is just so crazy for me right now. And I look forward to the eco-horror chapter.
Yeah. Especially since she ended the chapter with the car graveyard.
Yes.
And said that it would play into an opposite role in eco-horror.
Yes.
I was like, that's interesting to take another trope and turn it around for a new purpose.
Yeah, the car graveyard, which everyone knows the car graveyard, you know, like...
Although she made a good point. She was like, why would you, one, trespass on somebody's property, and then two, trespass on somebody's property with all these car graveyards and missing person photos, and be like, oh no, this is fine.
Yeah, for me, that's like one red flag, two red flags, let me turn around and go away. But it also, when she said that, I was immediately brought back to, there's this one meme, and it shows a family moving into a house with smiley faces on. At the very top it says, the real estate agent says, this house has been haunted, or 23 people died in this house. Family moving right on it. Why?
Speaking of, I started watching that show Surreal Estate. It's actually pretty good.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, oh, okay. I like this. It's not great, but I like it.
Yeah. I just read a book called Local Woman Missing, and it was interesting, but I'm going to give away the end because the lesbian lover was the killer, and I was like, oh. I was not expecting. It came out of nowhere. It was good.
Yeah.
It was a slow read. My sister said she read it in a couple days. It took me about 2 weeks to read it.
Oh, dang.
It just was too slow for me.
Speaking of people that have read books that we read, Jerry read Out of Body.
Oh.
Yeah, for 31 Days of Horror. Because she said we really intrigued her.
Yeah.
And then she's excited because I told her we were going to put up the 31 days at the beginning of September.
Yeah.
And she like wanted to know what the twist was. And she's like, yeah, I did not see that coming. And I was like, right? Like, where?
Came out of nowhere.
Where did that...
It was one that was just like, huh, alrighty.
Yeah, I guess this is the ride we're on now.
Yeah. Which I felt that way about one of the other ones that we read. And I kept thinking like, okay, this is where we're going. The one with the friend in the movie theater.
Night of the Mannequins.
Night of the Mannequins. I was like, this is how this is gonna play out. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still really conflicted about that one. Anyway, we should not be talking about this.
We're not gonna talk about
because that's for 31 Days of Horror.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just so Jerry will find another one to be intrigued in and start early.
Yeah, Jerry, I'm gonna start reading The Last Final Girl now.
Oh, yeah.
That's gonna be my bedtime book. But yeah, the 31 Days is gonna be interesting. I started reading X's for Eyes, so that we can talk about that one first, because I think that's gonna be a first book. But yeah, great chapter. I feel like there was a lot of insight. I didn't have the historical background that you did, so I appreciated what you brought, because I just had my pop culture stuff.
And ironically, none of the reality TV for the first time.
I know! I have no clue about any of those shows, except I know that the Duck Dynasty guys, they're rich because they came out with that duck call thing. But I was never interested in watching it. I was never interested in watching any of those reality shows. Redneck Island, I might look into.
Yeah.
I may not watch it, but I might look into see what it was about.
Right, the premise.
Yeah, because that's interesting.
I may need some clarification.
Yeah. I'm gonna look it up right now. Because I just, like, what is the premise? Redneck Island reality show. What in the heck? Oh my gosh. Steve Austin hosts as a group of Americans from the South are dropped on a deserted tropical island.
Oh my god, it's Survivor, but for rednecks. Hosted by Stone Cold Steve Austin. How did we miss that?
Because it was on country music television.
Oh, okay.
So I don't look at that channel.
No,
and
that's
it's
hilarious.
like, that's so... And it ran for 5 seasons.
Wow.
So, yeah, okay.
All right, cool. And with that, I think we're good. Yeah. So I had this like weird sliding scale that she mentioned. That was the sliding scale of where Backwoods horror was, or cannibalism. That's what it was.
Ah, yeah.
So the sophisticated cannibal is Hannibal Lecter, and the inhuman cannibal is Chud, Hills Have Eyes, or Mutants, and the hillbilly redneck cannibal is actually right in the middle of that.
Oh, okay.
She says that that's why it's such a common trope, because they're not sophisticated, but they haven't lost all the things that make them human. Yeah. That's what makes them scary, because they're in between.
Yeah. And you just don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think we're gone.
I gotta go school shopping, so we'll see y'all later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
If you liked listening to us ramble on about horror, subscribe to our podcast and tell your friends. And if you would like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram or Facebook at LLOTL Podcast.
Check out our website by going to lastlibraryonTheLeft.com. Be sure to visit our About Us page to discover our 2 truths and a lie. Or, if you'd like to send us an email, you can reach us at somethingwicked@lastlibraryonTheLeft.com.